Chapter 3303. Bai Shiwali fell into his arms and stared at him. What do you want to do? Nothing. I just want to tell you the consequences of leaving me. He looked down at her swollen face. To be honest, her face was not the type that he liked the most. He preferred classical features, but she had a European face with sharp eyes and a small nose. He secretly felt that she looked like a monkey. It was undeniable that it was a mainstream, superficial beauty. He didn't appreciate it at first, but now that her little nose was red from crying, she looked more adorable. Yulin lowered his head and rubbed her nose with his nose. He murmured, "If you leave me, there may be a lot of female demons around me. I may do the things that I do with you with others. For example, the lawyer AI way that you care a lot about." Bai Shiwali stared at him, and every word he said was brushing against her lips. It was obvious that he had seduced her. She tried to stare at him. He chuckled and trapped her with his long arms and legs. He pressed his forehead against hers. "You want me to hit her, but do you want me to do what we do? Kiss you like this, huh?" As he said that, he kissed her lips gently and seductively. Bai Shiwali forgot to cry. Damn, this old man was really good at seducing people. But no matter how he seduced her, it couldn't change the fact that he went out to have an affair. Wasn't he very busy? If he didn't do anything wrong, why did he come home to coax her in the daytime? Last night, she was drinking alone, and he went out on a date with AI Wei. Riceworm felt a knife twisting in his heart. He couldn't forgive him at all. When he kissed her, she suddenly couldn't stand it and turned her face away. She cried. "What's wrong?" His voice was unprecedentedly gentle. He admitted that he deliberately coaxed her. The photo last night was actually nothing. It would be fine after he explained it, but he knew that it would affect Bai Shiwali's life in the future. Their identities determined that this matter wouldn't end easily. So he coaxed her. He thought that he wouldn't feel bad, but when he saw her cry, he was unexpectedly distressed. She cried and said that it wasn't for him. "Go away. Yulin, can you be a little more promising?" "Yes, I'm a good-for-nothing. I can't bear to part with the little bastard." He pulled her into his arms and threatened in a low voice, "If you cry again, I'll hit your butt." She was forced to lie on his shoulder and angrily bit him. She didn't let go until it bled. After that, she cried silently. "I don't want to live with you anymore." He didn't care about the wound on his shoulder. Instead, he took a tissue and wiped her tears. Then, he said softly, "Shweli, it's my fault. Are you unhappy that I called you Miss Bai? You asked the security guards to kick me out? She sniffed, and you slapped me in the face." The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. She said again, "I don't want to live with you anymore." "Are you angry, or do you not like me?" He held her face and forced her to look at him. She did not want to look at him, so he forced himself to look at her. She wailed and finally looked at him. "Yulin, take your hand away." He still stared at her little face. "I've already returned the slap. Do you want to hit me again?" As soon as he finished speaking, she slapped him. Chapter 3304. Yulin's face darkened after being slapped by her, but he controlled his temper. "Have you calmed down?" He knew that he wasn't a man with a good temper, but he had let her slap him 3 times. He had to change this shortcoming in the future. He swallowed his anger, but the riceworm wasn't moved at all. She still glared at him. "I don't want to live with you anymore." She wanted to run after saying that, but he caught her with one hand and said in a low voice, "The photo is just a problem of angle. I'm not with her, and I have no intention of betraying the marriage." In his mind, this could be considered a confession, but he was facing a riceworm, and she was waiting for him to slap her. She slapped him in front of so many people. Didn't she want her face? She didn't speak and ignored him. Yulin stared at her. "You really can't forgive me?" "No." She lowered her head and bit her lips. Yulin suddenly laughed. "All right, I can't do anything if you don't forgive me. I'm going to work. By the way, Secretary Lee said that lawyer AI Wei wants to see me today. I rejected her, but I can see her now that I'm free." After saying that, he was about to get up. The riceworm didn't stop him, nor did she say anything angry. She just sat there with red eyes. She didn't know what to do, and more importantly, she was at a loss about the future. Yulin looked at her and suddenly couldn't bear to see her like that. Maybe he was really bad. Just like what his mother said, She had been like this since she was young. Why should he be so harsh to her? In her world, there was only one feeling, and that was you don't like me, and I won't like you anymore. It was that simple. Actually, he was sure that she had already liked him, and maybe she still liked him now. But now, she decided not to like him anymore. This kind of little fool was really hard to deal with. He smiled helplessly and sat next to her with a dark face. The bed is so messy, and you didn't even clean it up. Have you decided to be a rice worm? Let's divorce. You don't have the right to call me a rice worm anymore. She opened her eyes and lowered her head. Yimulin, I mean it. I don't want to live with you anymore. I hate men who hit their wives. She wasn't good, but no matter how bad she was, as long as he didn't annoy her, she would give him face outside. But that slap made her feel very cheap. If a man slapped you and gave you a date to eat, and you immediately said that it was very sweet, that would be too cheap. Her stubbornness made Yimulin feel helpless. But in his heart, he really wanted to hold her back. So he actually picked her up and walked to the bathroom in a good mood. She anxiously punched and kicked him. Bastard, what are you trying to do? He looked down at her with a look of disgust. You're so dirty. I'll help you wash it. Take a shower? He was stunned for a moment before he was thrown into the bathtub. Yimulin adjusted the temperature of the water and turned it on. At the same time, he peeled her like a duckling and sprayed water all over her face. She was about to go crazy, but the man seemed to be amused. His Xiongnu accent vibrated, and he let out a deep laugh. Yimulin, you bastard, let me go. She floated in the bathtub and drank a lot of water. I can't swim. Let me out. He put too much water in and pressed her down. She was extremely uncomfortable. Yimulin chuckled. Now, you don't look like a rice worm anymore. You look like a little tortoise. Chapter 33:05. Bai Shuili grabbed his collar and pulled him down with all her might. She pulled, and finally he was dragged down. There was a lot of water in the bathtub, and now it was overflowing. The water flowed all over the floor, but no one cared. He was dragged in. She felt that she was suffocating. As she floated up and down, she was held by him and placed on his waist. Yimulin's clothes were on him, but she was in a mess. Her hands were on his waist, and she looked like a puppy that fell into the water. And he had stripped her clean. Somehow, his arms came around her, and he leaned forward to kiss her on the lips. She was wet all over and seemed to be in a daze. She just stared at him. She looked so pitiful. Yimulin's gaze softened, and he whispered, Shueli, let's stop fighting, okay? Before she could come back to her senses, he kissed her again. He had his way in the bathtub. The water seemed to be boiling, and she finally came back to her senses. She wanted to struggle and resist, but she couldn't. He was so strong that she broke in his hands easily. He only had sex with her once in the bathtub, and then he carried her back to the master bedroom. He waved away the paper balls and put her on it. It was the first time that he worshipped her like this, from top to bottom. Bai Shuili kept scolding him. She pulled his hair and scolded him for being obscene and shameless. But in the end, her throat felt like it was on fire. She couldn't make a sound anymore. She could only pull his hair and helplessly endure everything he gave her. Lawyer, you didn't go to work. He coaxed his wife at home for almost the whole morning. When it was almost noon, while he was still warm, the phone beside him rang. He didn't stop and picked it up directly. It was on speakerphone. It was AI Wei on the other side. Mulin, I still feel that our matter has affected your marriage. Can we talk about it? AI Wei was unwilling to give up. She wanted to talk to him about the photos, but the phone rang a second later. It was the sound of a man and a woman at that moment, especially Bai Shuili, who was meowing like a kitten. She was so loved that she felt like she was going to break. AI Wei could almost imagine that scene in her mind. It was something she didn't want to think or believe. She would rather believe that Yimulin and Bai Shuili's marriage was just like that day in the office, cold and without warmth. But now, they're making love at noon. AI Wei didn't want to believe that the man who hadn't touched her all this while would press down on another woman without restraint. No, he was not such a greedy man. He was so abstinent. How could he like to hold such a shallow woman? Sherry must have seduced him. At this moment, Yimulin's voice sounded faintly. It doesn't affect anything. My relationship with my wife is still very good. Just as he was about to hang up, the worm in his arms suddenly looked up, crawled up, and gently bit his Adam's apple. Like a kitten, it nibbled, kissed, and licked. He groaned in embarrassment. His rough and hoarse voice was very pleasing to the ears. When a man screamed, it was much more sensual than a woman. On the other side, AI Wei immediately hung up the phone, her heart heaving up and down. She convinced herself that it was nothing. They were husband and wife. Making love was nothing. He was just fulfilling his duty as a husband. Chapter 3306. In the main house of the Yi family, Yi Mulin finally let her go. He rolled over and pulled her into his arms again. "Are you still leaving?" he asked in a low voice. Bai Shuli bit her lip. "Of course. Yi Mulin, don't think that I'll forgive you just because we slept together once. It's not that easy." He wasn't angry. He lay down and curled her long hair. "What do I have to do to make you willing?" She didn't say anything. After lying down for a while, she said softly, "I'm a little tired. I want to sleep." Then she lay down on the pillow and really fell asleep. She hadn't slept well for a whole day and night, and she had been fooled by him for so long. Yi Mulin wanted to talk to her again, but he didn't have the heart to wake her up when he saw that she was asleep. He went to take a shower and went downstairs while she was sleeping. Mama Yi was downstairs. She was a little surprised to see her son coming downstairs. She thought that the two of them would only quarrel. Yi Mulin stretched. "Ask Aunt Gui to bring some food over. I'm a little hungry." Mama Yi rolled her eyes at him and whispered to her son, "Shueli, you've been married to her for a few months. Are you ready to have a child?" At this time, Aunt Gui brought the food over and pricked up her ears. Mama Yi glared at her, and Aunt Gui immediately ran away. Before eating, Yi Mulin glanced at his mother and smiled. "I didn't plan before." Shueli took her medicine. "What about now? Do you have any plans?" Mama Yi asked quickly. Actually, she wasn't in a hurry. Her two sons were in their 30s. One was just married, and the other didn't even have a girlfriend. It was really worrying. So she was looking forward to it. Yi Mulin didn't even have a child after such a long time. In private, Old Yi also complained that it was useless. Yi Mulin looked at his mother and didn't say anything. He just nodded slightly. This attitude was very gratifying for Mama Yi. Her eyes lit up. When Mulin was eating, Mother Yi could not help but personally cook for her son. She even gently patted her son's shoulder. "Let Auntie Gui help you make up for it. If your father knows that you're working hard, he won't let you do some work. How about this? Let Mubai go to some social events if he can." Yi Mulin frowned. "Mom, is it that exaggerated?" Mama Yi smiled. "It's been hard on you too. Mubai, it's still early. You've worked hard." Yi Mulin was helpless, but when he lowered his head to eat, the corners of his mouth curled up. He thought to himself that it was actually not bad to have a daughter who looked like a rice worm. His first thought was of a daughter, not a son. After Yi Mulin finished his meal, he went back to his room to take a look. Riceworm was still sleeping. It must have been too tired because of him. He sat down and reached out to pinch her face. She seemed to have lost a lot of weight in just 2 days. He sighed, and then his gaze fell on her lower abdomen. He wasn't using protection today. If she wasn't in her safe period, they might have already had a child. After all, he had done it a few times today, and the quantity was high. He sat for a while, then went to the study and took out a paper bag from a drawer. The broken phone and black diamond card. The necklace and ring were intact, but the bracelet was broken. Yi Mulin wasn't a superstitious person, but the broken bracelet bothered him. He didn't feel good about it. Chapter 3307. Mama Yi was comforted. "It's rare that you know how to love your wife." She paused. "Why did you go out?" "To the office?" Of course, Yi Mulin wouldn't say anything too private, even to his mother. He coughed. "I have something to do. I'll be back in 2 hours." Mama Yi nodded. Yi Mulin drove out and went directly to the counter where he bought the bracelet. Of course, the shopping guide remembered such a big customer. "Mr. Yi, what can I do for you?" Yi Mulin took out the necklace. "It's broken here. Can it be repaired?" The shopping guide took it out and looked at it. Then she said with some regret, "Maybe not, Mr. Yi. Our craftsmanship is unique. It can't be repaired if it's broken in the middle." Yi Mulin looked at it silently and looked up. As long as it's in the middle, it can be repaired, right? Theoretically, it can be repaired, but we only sell the whole thing. We don't sell this small part separately. The shopping guide said in a low voice. Of course, you can order it outside, but it will be different from ours. Yulin looked at her. If I buy an identical one from your counter, can you use the new one on top of the old one to fix it? The shopping guide couldn't believe it. Buying a new one for more than 10 million just to take a small part and put it on the old one? Just how unprofitable was this? She was shocked and stammered. Mr. Yi, of course, yes. Do you want to pay by card? Yulin looked at her with a look of, what else? And then swiped his card. He thought that if he swiped the card of the rice worm, she would definitely quarrel with him and cry in front of him. Just thinking of her like that, he felt that she was superficial and ridiculous, but she was also quite cute. He swiped the card, and the shopping guide immediately called the brand maintenance manager, who helped Yulin repair the old bracelet as fast as possible. She put it in the box with a meaningful look. Mr. Yi, it's done. As for the new one, after it was taken apart, there were actually a few nice diamonds on it. Yulin didn't care much about it and casually put it in his pocket. Finally, he threw it into the drawer of his study. He took the bracelet and went to the first floor to buy a phone. This time, it wasn't an Apple phone. Instead, he spent some time looking for the flamboyant diamond-encrusted version that she used to use. It cost 880,000 yuan. What a waste. Driving back to the night house, he took off his coat and looked at his mother. Is she awake? Mama Yi smiled. Not yet. She couldn't help but reprimand him. Mulin, take it easy next time. Girls shouldn't be so rude. Just looking at you. Yulin looked at his mother. Do you want to have grandchildren? Mama Yi did not say anything. After a while, she sighed softly. Anyway, you just do as you see fit. Yulin smiled and walked upstairs. Bai Shuli woke up and was sulking. He stood at the door. What are you thinking about? She glared at him. Why didn't you take precautions today? Yulin walked in and sat on the edge of the bed. He smiled and asked, what do you think? She was not stupid. She quickly guessed that he did it on purpose. So she opened her eyes wide. You want me to get pregnant? He did not deny it. He smiled faintly, took out the bracelet, took her hand, and put it on. Just right. Chapter 33:08. She looked at him in a daze. Yulin smiled. At this moment, he only had one perfect spot of satisfaction. He never thought that one day, this spot he added for her would save her life. And it was also this vague kindness that saved her and also saved himself. Baishuli looked down and looked down. I don't want it. She wanted to take it off, but he stopped her and said in a low voice, do you still want to lose your temper with me? There was a phone in his hand. It was beautiful and flashy. She should be happy, but she just stared at him. After a long time, she looked down. I don't want to forgive you. These words were a little childish. It was cute, and also very annoying. Although Yulin didn't coax people often, he knew that her anger was mostly gone. She was just throwing a tantrum. As long as he let her go, this matter would be over. After they got married, he had been suppressing her. After their relationship got better, this was the first time they had a fierce conflict. And it was because of an unrelated woman. Actually, it had nothing to do with AI Wei. It was his own problem. It was caused by his and by Shuali's personalities. He looked at her throwing a tantrum and suddenly found it interesting. It was also interesting to indulge her. He was a little harsh on her outside. She was like this. If he really didn't like her, how could he sleep with her? He had been secretly paying attention to her since she was young. He was the one who hated her. He couldn't let it go, so why struggle? He hooked her chin and teased her like a puppy. What are you going to do if you don't want to forgive me? He leaned against the headboard, reached out, and pulled her into his arms, looking at her. Even if you don't divorce, I will still have an affair like you. She bit her lip. Yulin frowned. What do you mean by having an affair? I mean having an affair. She stared at him and only dared to whisper. He laughed. Then who are you going to have an affair with? Mubai? She looked at him secretly and then didn't say anything. Yulin smiled and pinched her face. If you dare to sleep with Mubai, I will skin you. Then I will sleep with someone else. She snorted and glared at him. He suddenly said, I've only been with AI Wei for over a month. We haven't even had a deep kiss. She looked at him suspiciously. Yulin smiled. You don't believe me? It has nothing to do with me. She hung her head again, not wanting to talk to him. Yulin's heart suddenly softened. His millet worm was actually very cute. It was obvious that he didn't mind, but he refused to admit it. He hugged her and kissed her. His voice was hoarse. Can anyone else be as good as me? She struggled in his arms and glared at him. Yulin, you're shameless. He smiled and passed the phone to her. Calm down, huh? She glanced at it, and pink bubbles appeared in her eyes. How did he know that she had her eyes on this one? She hated the iPhone to death and forced herself to use it. Yet he was so mean to her and hit her. Still don't want to forgive. She groaned again, hanging her head, toying with his tie. As a man, he would be a pig if he didn't express himself at this time. Yulin lowered his head and kissed the corner of her mouth. What else do you want? I don't have enough pocket money. Also, it's too tiring to do it every day. Once a week at most. She raised her chin and looked at him. Chapter 3309. Yulin smiled and asked, just one night. She grunted and looked at him, certain that he would not agree. But Yulin agreed. He thought for a while and said softly, then I'll finish my work in 1 day a week and accompany you. The words accompany you were said in a weird way. Bai Shiuli opened her eyes wide. Was he what she thought he was? Yulin smiled and said, let's have fun that day. It meant that he would not let go of her for 24 hours. Riceworm thought about its skin. Riceworm tightened its skin around itself and glared at him. Yulin pulled her hair and said slowly, it's okay if you don't want to be worn out. Then we'll pay in installments, okay? She was about to cry. What installments? Yulin smiled and changed the topic. You don't have enough pocket money? Bai Shiuli, you don't have enough money every month. Have you ever thought about those children who don't have enough to eat? Yes, I am vain. I am shallow. I only care about my own life and death. She whispered and said confidently, I can't even live well myself. How can I care about others? Besides, others will look noble if they are compared with me, right? Yulin was so angry that he laughed. He looked at her and said, are you so useless? She suddenly came over and hooked his belt. Such a small action made lawyer Yez blood boil. They had been married for several months, and this was the first time she took the initiative. But obviously, he thought too much. Bai Shiulan hooked his belt and said, your belt is only tens of thousands. Why didn't you think about the children who don't have enough to eat when you bought it? My mother bought it, he said in a hoarse voice. She glared at him and then moved her little hand to his shirt. This shirt should be more than 8,000. My mother bought it. His eyes were deep. Her little hand was still moving. He caught her hand and stared at her. Bai Shiuli, don't you think you are neglecting your duty? She stared at him. How am I neglecting my duty? Didn't I lie on the bed and let you do it? He smiled helplessly and pulled her hair. I mean, why didn't you buy my clothes? I don't have money. She said matter-of-factly, besides, you didn't buy it for me. He looked at her and chuckled. Then I will buy it for you in the future. You can buy it with me. He stretched and said, I'm in my 30s. I can't let my mother worry about my clothes, right? His rice bug clutched his pocket tightly. Swipe your card. Don't touch my pocket money. He held back his laughter. Okay. Bai Shiuli suddenly remembered something and said, okay. He smiled. Bai Shiuli didn't say anything else. Did you remember your card? Do you want to be a little bastard? I don't want to be a bastard. She glared at him. Give it to me or not. Then he turned around angrily and said in a low voice, it's clearly your fault. It's clearly your own fault for messing around outside. You even hit your wife. I don't want to forgive you at all. It's useless even if you beg. Yulin looked at her and said in a low voice, it's your fault. You were the one who broke the shoes and hit your wife. I don't want to forgive you at all. It's useless for you to beg. Mom gave it to me. She didn't take it. She was still thinking about the money. He stared at her. She was thinking about Mubai's money, wasn't she? Chapter 33:10. No, I want you to go shopping with me. She bit her lips. I want to go shopping in Milan. Lawyer Yi thought that she really couldn't change her habit of eating shit. But there was no other way. He was the one who begged her. He hummed and agreed. But in his heart, he was thinking that he could go shopping during the day, and the nighttime belonged to him. Riceworm's heart was already in heaven, but she was embarrassed and unwilling to show her enthusiasm. In fact, the only advantage of marrying Yimulin was that he was a lawyer who only wanted to get what he wanted. She could buy everything she wanted in the Bai family. Just like what he said, she was restricted by her father's identity. In fact, this was why the two sons of the Yi family didn't go into politics, but chose to be a lawyer and a star. No one knew that the Yi family was going to cultivate the third generation, which was a good way to avoid some risks. But Riceworm couldn't think so much. Her mind was full of the scene of shopping in Milan. Just thinking about it made her angry. Turning around, she proactively placed her little face on his lap and prostrated herself under Lawyer Ye's trousers. Yimulin pinched her face, not angry anymore. "I don't care, you have to deal with the broken shoes." She stared at him. "Don't see AI Mulin in the future. Otherwise, I won't be a bastard anymore." Yimulin looked at her little face that was flushed with anger, feeling angry and funny at the same time. He didn't say anything. He just played with her little face and trapped her by his side, not letting her go. He seemed to be thinking about something. After a long time, he whispered, "Schwellon, let's have a child, shall we?" She lay on his lap, and her relaxed body suddenly became stiff. After a while, she said softly, "Yimulin, is it not enough for you to raise a riceworm? Do you want to raise another one?" He pulled her hair. "When the child is born, I will educate it myself." She blinked. "You mean I can still continue to do my nails, beauty, go shopping, and drink coffee?" He hummed, which meant that he agreed. But soon he said, "If it's a daughter, you can take care of it." Riceworm couldn't believe what she heard. Did he mean to let his daughter develop as she pleased and let her raise her into a riceworm? She stared at him. "Yimulin, you value boys more than girls." Actually, she had misunderstood. The men of the Yi family had a heavy burden on their shoulders. They were not allowed to neglect their duties, but it was different for girls. Yimulin had never felt that there was anything wrong with his wife's current state. She worshipped money and squandered the family fortune to give him a sense of achievement. Right? Yimulin lowered his head to look at her and said slowly, "There's nothing bad about a girl being like you." Her eyes widened. "Yimulin, you admire me very much?" Yimulin knocked her head. "By Shueli, you think too much." "Do you think I will appreciate a worm? Then why do you want our daughter to be like me?" she said indignantly. Then he smiled, and it was a very meaningful smile. "Does this mean that you also feel that it's not good for you to not make progress?" She did not make a sound and hung her head low. She even looked a little cute. Yimulin sighed softly and reached out his hand to rub her gently. "Actually, it's quite good for you to be like this. Didn't I say that you're highlighting the nobility of others?" She was furious. Chapter 33:11. Of course, she wasn't willing. She snorted, "Can't a daughter be raised to be an elite?" She stole a glance at him. Yimulin smiled. Actually, he didn't mind spending time on children. It was just that he thought she would like girls like her. Moreover, he quite liked it too. He didn't really appreciate it in the past, but now he felt that it was quite good. If Bai Shueli was an elite woman, based on their conflict yesterday, he probably wouldn't be able to coax her even in a month. Moreover, he couldn't imagine himself coaxing a strong woman. She was just the way she was. He said, "If you don't mind her looking down on you when she grows up, will you help me?" Her voice was very soft. At that moment, Yimulin had to admit that he was touched by her cuteness. He said hoarsely, "Of course." With that said, he reached out and caressed her hair. It was the kind of warmth that didn't carry feelings. They had spent many nights in bed after their marriage, and he had always been wild and rough. Only this time was different. This time, it seemed to be very different. Riceworm bit her lips and whispered after a long time, "If it's a girl, are we still going to have more?" He reached out and pinched her cheeks, saying the truth. "We have to have 2 sons." The Yi family always had 2 sons to ensure the quality. However, he suspected that Bai Shueli would lower the standard. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to pick out the best, even if he gave birth to one. However, he didn't say that out loud. Smart men wouldn't say that, at least for now. Bai Shueli stared at him for a long time before saying softly, "What if we can't give birth?" "If we can't give birth, we'll keep doing it until we do." He smiled. She lowered her head and suddenly felt that she had suffered a huge loss. It turned out that there were conditions for her to spend his money and enjoy all these. If she didn't get a divorce, she would have to have more than 2 sons with him. What if she couldn't give birth to a son? Would she be divorced? She wanted to ask, but didn't. It was as if she really wanted to be a bastard. The two of them chatted for a long time before she whispered again, "I still can't forgive you." Yi Mulin finally tasted the fickleness of women. However, she was just saying it out loud. She couldn't forgive him in her heart, but she had already given in. If it was in the past, he probably would have looked down on such a spineless person, but she was by Xueli. She had been like this since she was young, and he also hated her for this. Now, it seemed like he could tolerate her a little. No matter how hard she tried to forgive, she put on a necklace and the ring. Actually, she had a lot of jewelry, but after he bought her a necklace and a ring, she never took them off. When he put them on for her, he suddenly thought of something. So he looked up at her and smiled. "Riceworm, you've liked me for a long time, haven't you?" "No." She was a little aloof. "What I like is your money." "Then why didn't you like other people's money?" "That means you still like me." A lawyer was a lawyer. In a few words, he changed the topic. She rolled her eyes at him and kicked him. "I'm going to sleep. Also, take care of your broken shoes. Otherwise, you won't even have the chance to be a bastard." He reached out and touched his nose, not wanting to argue with her. After a while, she fell asleep. He went to the study and personally called the Bai family to apologize to Bai Xueli's father. This kind of thing happened not only because of the relationship between him and the riceworm. There were many things involved. The slightest carelessness could cause turmoil in the Bai and Yi families. Chapter 33:12. Yi Mulin's phone call was not easy. For him, Father Bai was not only an elder, but also a political ally of the Yi family. What happened between him and AI Wei would definitely make Father Bai uncomfortable. However, Father Bai didn't blame him too much. He said lightly, "I believe you, Mulin. I know Shirley's character. She will call me crying when she is wronged. She has a bad personality. You should teach her more." He hung up after a few more words. Maybe he was really busy. Mulin hung up the phone with a complicated feeling. His wife didn't call him crying. She just quarreled with him. Was it because in her heart, she actually believed him? She was just angry that he hit her yesterday and that he didn't call her Miss Bai. Mulin's heart was a little soft. This rarely happened in his life because of a woman, and it was his wife, the type he didn't appreciate at all. He smoked a cigarette and made a few more calls, including to his father. Compared with Father Bai's understatement, Father Yi seemed to be very cautious. He said a few words to Yi Mulin. "You must hold on to Shirley. Your relationship will be magnified in front of the media now. Any bad news will cause a big uproar. And AI Wei, do you need me to do something?" Father Yi was not an ordinary person since he could sit in this position today. He should be cruel and have many tricks up his sleeves. Yi Mulin said lightly, "It has nothing to do with her. She didn't do it. In fact, they all knew that it must be the Yi family's political enemies who did it. AI Wei was just a pawn among them." Father Yi was a little dissatisfied with his son's words. "Mulin, you are still too soft-hearted. On such a road, there would always be innocent people involved. It was better to get rid of these troubles as soon as possible." Father Yi had high expectations for Mulin. Originally, he did not intend to let his 2 sons enter politics. Mu Bai could not be a celebrity, but Mu Lin was different. Mu Lin was a lawyer and had handled many important economic cases. He also had a lot of international connections. Moreover, he was in the country. Father Yi thought a little too much, but he didn't tell his son about it. It was not time yet. Yi Mulin hung up the phone and took out a document to read while smoking. He was indeed a very busy man. It was already very rare for him to spend the whole day at home with his wife. He was working at home. When he thought of the riceworm lying on the bed, he suddenly smiled. It seemed not bad. Later, he simply took the laptop to the master bedroom and sat on the sofa opposite the bed. From time to time, he would take out his phone and talk to Secretary Lee. Riceworm was sleeping soundly. His voice was low and hoarse, and he would look at her from time to time. At the law firm, Secretary Lee covered her ears. Her ears were burning. Boss's voice today was very magnetic, very hoarse, and very pleasant to listen to. Yi Mulin hung up the phone, looked at the rice worm again, and continued to read the documents. His phone lit up. It was AI Wei. AI Wei had called to interrogate him. The moment the call connected, she said, "Yi Mulin, there are photos of us online." Yi Mulin said calmly, "Lawyer AI, is this matter troubling you?" In fact, he had seen it too. It was nothing more than a picture of them sitting together drinking coffee. Chapter 33:13. AI Wei couldn't say anything since Yi Mulin was so casual. She hesitated. "See you the day after tomorrow." Yi Mulin hung up without saying anything. He looked up and saw that the girl sitting on the bed opposite him had woken up and was staring at him. He put down the phone and looked at the sky outside. "Are you up for dinner?" "No, I'm tired." She lay down again and hugged the quilt. "Yi Mulin, you didn't go to work today and made such a big noise. I don't want to go down for dinner." Yi Mulin smiled and put down everything in his hands. He walked to the bed. "Are you shy?" He even tried to touch her face, but she dodged. She glared at him. "Don't touch me. You're annoying." Yi Mulin smiled and didn't say anything. He let her lie down and went downstairs for dinner. After a while, the smell of food floated in from downstairs. It was so tempting that Ricky almost drooled. He was so hateful. He didn't even let her eat after a day of pleasure. The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. She wanted to smash the phone, but didn't dare to. She sulked and smelled the smell of food, which made her even angrier. Downstairs, Mama Yi asked worriedly while eating, "Is Shirley still awake?" She stretched out her hand and patted her son, half reproachful and half happy. "Why don't you be gentler?" Yi Mulin smiled. "She's awake. She's angry." Mama Yi was shocked and looked at her son. "She's awake, but you won't let her come downstairs for dinner?" Yi Mulin smiled again. "She's angry. She won't come down. I still have to coax her." Mama Yi was anxious and was about to go upstairs herself. Yi Mulin said calmly, "I'll cook for her later." Mama Yi froze. "What? You're going to cook?" Her eldest son had never cooked before. How could he say that he was going to cook for Shirley? Yi Mulin pretended that he didn't see his mother's expression. He went to the kitchen after dinner. He studied abroad and was good at cooking Western food. He made spaghetti and curry chicken and brought them upstairs. The smell was everywhere. Bai Shuli sat up and stared at him. "Is this for me?" "No, I ate it myself." He brought it to the sofa and smiled. "Aren't you angry?" She shouted angrily. "Even if I'm angry, I still have to eat." She didn't care. She climbed up and sat beside him without brushing her teeth. She snatched the fork from his hand and began to eat. The pure taste made her sigh with satisfaction. "Delicious." Then he looked at Yi Mulin and said, "The chef in your house is pretty good. He really knows how to enjoy life." Yi Mulin didn't fight with her. He leaned against the side and looked at her indifferently. Actually, a rice worm was very easy to satisfy. As long as he gave her food and bought her something she liked, she would be very obedient. When he was handling work, she would sleep. When he was eating, she would be angry, but she would not argue with him. It was quite easy to raise. His gaze was deep, but it contained a depth of affection that even he himself did not know. Perhaps he had been looking at her like this since she was 6 or 7 years old. It had been almost 20 years. Perhaps his hatred was just an excuse that he couldn't bear to like such an idiot. He thought about it, but didn't disturb her. He just kept his gaze on her face. Looking at her eating contentedly, he seemed to be satisfied too. Chapter 33:14. He thought of the time when he was with AI Wei. He looked at AI Wei and always convinced himself that he should like a woman with ideals. But when he looked at AI Wei's face, he thought of another face. She had a beautiful face, but she was stupid, ignorant, and incompetent. When she was very young, she only knew how to wear flowery dresses all day long. She was so shallow. Of course, she was still shallow now. She even became Yi Mulin's wife. Lawyer Yi gritted his teeth and thought. In fact, when Mu Bai and Bai Shui Li's marriage broke down that day, Mu Bai would listen to him if he told him about the Yi family's life and death. Or maybe Mu Bai had already seen through his disguise, so he ran away from the wedding. Yi Mulin was a very smart person. He realized that Mu Bai was not the kind of person who would run away from the wedding. Why did he do that day? When he understood, he chuckled softly, and it was a joyful laugh. In fact, Millet Worm was abandoned by Mu Bai, and he happened to pick her up. He thought and reached out to pull her hair. Will you be obedient in the future? He was excited to get a new toy in his heart, but he didn't show it on his face. He still liked to bully her as before. Bai Shueli stared at him while eating. You are so hateful. She didn't want to listen to him. As soon as she finished speaking, he took away the food in her hand. If you don't listen to me, you won't get to eat. Millet Worm stared at him. Aunt Gui prepared this for me, not yours. I made it, he said lightly. She almost choked and stopped to look at him. You made it? She couldn't believe it. Yi Mulin sneered. Yes, I made it. Do you still want to eat it? She bit her lips. Yes. That pitiful look made his heart soften, but he was amused and angry at the same time. If you want to eat it, just call me. He thought for a moment and looked at her deeply. In fact, he wanted her to call him Mulin, just like how she called Mu Bai, instead of calling him Mu Lin and Mu Lin every day. He didn't mention it, so he didn't expect that she would directly call him husband. In the past, he didn't care when other women called him husband. He always thought that a husband and wife should keep some distance between them. It was okay at night, but they couldn't be too intimate during the day. But now she called him husband. Yi Mulin was really electrocuted. He looked at her. His gaze was calm, but his heart was full of lust. Come here. The voice was extremely cold. Rice Bug moved a little closer to him and secretly picked up a fork to eat a mouthful of curry chicken. He accidentally saw it. Yi Mulin's gaze was unfathomable. Then he said in an especially calm voice, Go brush your teeth. Why? I didn't finish it, she said unhappily. Then she boldly and shamelessly sat on his lap and continued to eat. Her chin was grabbed by him, and the piece of curry chicken in her hand fell to the carpet. She looked at him blankly and stammered, Yi Mulin, what's wrong? Go brush your teeth. His voice suddenly became hoarse. I don't really like the taste of curry. I like it, and I'm the one eating it. Not you, she said angrily. Yi Mulin's gaze deepened. His voice was low and hoarse. I'm going to eat too. She bit her lips. Don't you like the taste? I'll try it. After saying that, he held her waist with one hand and pinched her chin with the other. He directly pried open her lips and tasted the curry with her. Bai Shueli's eyes widened. He kissed her before she even brushed her teeth. Didn't he think it was dirty? Chapter 33:15. But not only did he not dislike it, he was also very engrossed. This kiss lasted for a very, very long time. When he let go of her, Riceworm said hesitantly, Well, the food seems to be cold. At this moment, she did not know that his heart was boiling. She whispered in a very hoarse voice, Bai Shueli, do you like me? Riceworm was stunned and then looked at him as if he was sick. After a while, she asked him in a low voice, Do you have a fever? His eyes were locked on her. I am serious. She stuttered a little, and after a long time, she spat out a few words. I like you. I like your money. He looked a little disappointed and then smiled. You only like money? Riceworm lowered her head and looked at the coffee chicken pitifully. I still like your chicken. Yi Mulin was stunned for a moment. Then he could not help but laugh out loud. His laughter was deep and heavy. He said, Okay, he said Bai Shueli, remember what you said. Riceworm did not understand. She only said that the chicken he made was delicious. Not his chicken. Suddenly, she opened her eyes and stared at him. He was too shameless. Yi Mulin chuckled and returned her food to her. He even touched her head. Delicious chicken. Then he went to brush his teeth. He was still a little disgusted with the taste of curry. Riceworm looked at his back. She still could not figure out what was wrong with him today. Did he feel very sorry for her? But she did not dare to flatter herself. He had always hated her and despised her. There was the sound of water in the bathroom. She snorted. He despised her even when kissing her. When Yi Mulin came out of the bathroom, she had already finished the food. He smiled faintly and did not say anything. He just cleaned up and patted her. Go and wash up. Bai Shueli looked up. Yi Mulin, we are still in a cold war. He turned his head and looked at her angry face, then smiled. Whatever, do what you want. After saying that, he walked out, looking as if he would let her do whatever she wanted. Baishuali was so angry that she wanted to hit him with a pillow. It was really her illusion. How could he like her? He just wanted to tease her, not like her. At the door, Yulin shook his head and walked downstairs. When they came down again, she went to take a shower, and he sat on the sofa in a daze. This was very rare for the eldest son of the Yi family. She came out, and he told her to come and sit down. Baishuali dried her hair and looked at him warily. In the end, she still sat down. He took the towel from her and dried her hair, but his actions were obviously absent-minded. Baishuali stared at him silently. Their argument over AI Wei seemed to have disappeared. He coaxed her a few times, and it seemed to have disappeared after a few times. At this moment, he seemed to be thinking about something else. It was something very important to him. At first, Baishuali was still trying to figure out what he was thinking about. Later on, she felt a little tired. In addition, she didn't have enough brain capacity, so she stopped thinking about it. Thus, she laid on his lap and tried to sleep with her eyes half closed. Yulin dried his hair for a long time, but he was actually lost in thought. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "Let's move out, huh?" Baishuali was confused at first, but then she opened her eyes and stared at him. "Move out." Chapter 33:16. She lay on his lap. It was actually quite comfortable. She opened her eyes and looked at him quietly. Why? Yulin threw the towel aside and used his fingers to help her straighten her hair. He whispered, "You don't like living here, do you?" Riceworm changed his position. "Will there be servants if we live alone? We live in an apartment. There are no servants." His face darkened. She looked at him helplessly. "Do you mean I have to wash my own clothes, cook my own meals, and clean my own house?" He reached out to hold her chin. "Shouldn't you do all these yourself?" But we don't need it." She wanted to be bold and confident, but under his gaze, she seemed to lack confidence. "We can still hire someone to do it. How about we live here?" She thought quickly and found a good reason. "I like my mother very much. I think I can learn a lot from her. You just like her to wash your clothes for you." Yulin sneered and held her chin, as if he would break her little neck if she dared to lie. Baishuali was speechless. She could not say anything for a long time. After a long time, she asked in a low voice, "Have you decided, or are you asking for my opinion? Is there a difference?" His voice was cold. She shrank her neck and thought of something after a long time. "Yulin, shouldn't you be coaxing me? I'm still angry. You can't do this to me." He looked at her as if she was an idiot. It seemed a little late to think of it now. She protested, "I want to live here. I have decided." He said unexpectedly, "I will take you to work tomorrow. You don't need to move your things there. As for he pondered for a moment, "I will buy you new things." She stared at him. She had to buy everything she needed for at least a month. Would he have time to accompany her? But thinking about it, she thought that Yulin would accompany her for a month. Then she asked in a low voice, "I want to come back on Saturday and Sunday. At least 2 days a week. Someone would take care of her." She thought of eating takeout every day, and her face turned bitter. "Let's live here. It is good. I can learn to be a good wife and a good mother." Yulin's fingers gently touched her red lips. "Do you want to be a mother?" She nodded vigorously. Now that she was pregnant, he probably wouldn't let her do any more manual labor, right? She should be resting by now, right? Thinking of this, Yulin smiled softly. "Then let's do something so that you can be a mother." As he spoke, he carried her towards the large bed. Baishuali was stunned. Weren't they just talking about serious matters? Why did he suddenly have eyes? She punched him. "You've done it several times today. How is this man abstinence?" He clearly didn't know how to control himself. He was like this in a mansion. They lived alone, and he didn't give her anything to eat or drink. He tortured her like this every night. She would definitely be sucked dry by him. Just thinking about it made Riceworm feel gloomy. Therefore, when Yulin invited her to have breakfast with him the next morning, she was in a daze. Mama Yu was very concerned. "Yulin, Shirley doesn't seem to be feeling well. Do you want to take her to the hospital later?" Chapter 33:17. A little late to bed. This was a lot of information. Even Yulin's mother, who was experienced, couldn't help but blush. This son was too explicit. However, there was something more explicit. Yulin paused and said slowly, "Surely, and I won't be coming back tonight." At this time, Riceworm looked at Mama Yi reluctantly. He said he wants to move out. "Mama, I think it's good here." Mama Ye's mood was quite complicated. Her son obviously wanted to take his little wife out. He was probably enlightened. But what about Shirley? Yulin was right. She just wanted to stay here and live the life of a riceworm. There's nothing wrong with that. Mama Yi was in a dilemma. Shirley looked at Yulin secretly and whispered, "Mama, can I stay here?" That softness was something Mama Yi had never enjoyed before. She only had 2 sons and had never had such a soft little thing act like a spoiled child to her. Although she knew it was because she wanted something from her, as a carefree mother, her heart was still incredibly soft. She wanted to say yes, but it was not appropriate for her to intervene in the affairs of a young couple. Her son was not to be trifled with. Mama Yi looked at her youngest daughter-in-law and could only reluctantly give up. "Well, it's the same if you come back for dinner on Saturday and Sunday." Mama, Riceworm was very disappointed. She didn't want to wash clothes or cook. Her hands would become rough. Then Yulin would not like her and find a mistress outside. The more she thought about it, the more scared she was, but she dared not resist. In front of Mama Yi, she always spoke softly. Mama Yi glanced at her son and smiled lightly. "You're not allowed to bully Shirley. You can't force her to do things she doesn't like. She doesn't know how to wash clothes. As for cooking," she thought for a moment, "I'll ask the servants to go every day at noon." This pair of riceworms were really spoiled. Even Riceworm was a little flattered. Even her mother was not as meticulous as this. But after a long time, Yulin just said lightly, "Mama, don't send anyone. I will take good care of her." Riceworm broke out in a cold sweat when she heard this. Why did she have a bad feeling about this? Yulin wiped his lips and looked at his wife. "Are you done?" She pursed her lips. You're in a hurry to go to work. You can pick me up at night." As long as she could stay here, she would stay for another day. Yulin's voice was very light. "You don't like my office?" She was stunned. What did he mean? However, she soon realized that he was driving to his law firm, not his high-class apartment. She cried out, "Yulin, what are you doing? I don't have time to accompany you during the day. Come to my office." He paused. "Otherwise, I'm afraid you'll starve to death." She lowered her head and to say, "I dawn." Last time, they had been so fierce at his place. Moreover, she had said that whoever turned back was a bastard. She did not want to be a bastard. Of course, Yulin knew what she was thinking. He softened his voice. "I have a gift to give you. It's a big gift. Don't you want it?" Her eyes lit up, but she quickly suppressed it. She didn't want to appear greedy. Her voice was restrained. "Actually, you don't have to spend money. I am not such a shallow person." Chapter 33:18. After she said that, Lawyer Yi turned to look at her with a smile in his eyes. You're not such a shallow person." "Did I hear wrongly?" "Yes, how am I shallow? I'm outstanding too." Her voice was small, and there was a hint of dissatisfaction in it. Yulin held back his laughter and murmured after a while, "Yes, depends on the person." He thought that if she was outstanding, it might be good for others, but for him, she wasn't outstanding. What attracted him, made him hate and liked her was her superficiality, her stupidity, and her inability to do anything. If she knew everything and was perfect in everything, she wouldn't be any different from others to him. She would just be another AI way. Yulin held the steering wheel and suddenly smiled. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised, and he looked pleasing to the eye. At least in Shiuli's eyes, it was pleasing to the eye at this moment. He was really annoying and good-looking. Shiuli looked at him, and her heart suddenly jumped. Then she pretended to turn her face to the side, but she couldn't help looking at him after a while. Even if he was good-looking, he was annoying. She ignored him, and then forced herself not to look at him. Yulin, on the other hand, would occasionally look at her. He saw her fuming with anger and saw her pouting her lips. It was quite cute. He smiled, held the steering wheel, and focused on driving. When they were downstairs, the subordinates in the law firm were so excited that they were about to jump, because the bastard was coming. They just didn't know who would be the bastard between Lawyer Yi and Mrs. Yi. Everyone was inexplicably excited until the door opened. Although Bai Shuili was a worm, and she had lost face here last time, she felt that she had given him a slap in the face last time. She had also thrown some harsh words at him. This time, he was the one who begged her to come, so it would be fine for her to put on airs. Besides, didn't he prepare a gift for her? So she felt that he should be the bastard. When she came in, everyone looked at her, especially Secretary Li, who was a little excited. Yi Mulin glanced at his secretary and coughed. "Where's the gift I prepared?" Secretary Li's heart skipped a beat. "Lawyer Yi, it's on your desk. Give it to Mrs. Yi," he said, looking at Bai Shuili. The riceworm raised its head proudly. Secretary Li glanced at her. Afraid of her superior's authority, she still went to get it. It was a small transparent box filled with water, and inside it was a small tortoise. Secretary Li handed it over to Yi Mulin, then quickly ran away. Yi Mulin picked up the small box and smiled at the pale Bai Shuili. "This is for you. It's called Little White. Take good care of it. Xiao Bai." Her surname was Bai. Bai Shuili was furious. This bastard, didn't he just call her a bastard? "I don't want it." She refused to take it, unless it changes its name to Xiao Mumu. Yi Mulin's gaze was a little deep. He reached out and took out the little tortoise. He pulled her hand over and placed it on her palm. "Are you sure you don't want it? It's very cute." Bai Shuili was startled and flung it away with a cry. The little tortoise fell to the ground, with his limbs facing the sky. He looked very pitiful. Chapter 33:19. Bai Shuili stared at him. He smiled again. "Your decision? Yi Mulin, you're not an idiot, are you? You're a bastard." After a long time, she finally managed to speak. She felt pity for the little tortoise, so she squatted down and picked it up. It was only the size of an egg. Its small head shrank immediately. It was quite cute. She thought that it was similar to her. It should be the age to be arrogant, but it had to behave with its tail between its legs. No, it was just a tortoise with its tail between its legs. Thinking about it, it was like they were in the same boat. "Xiao Mumu, I will take care of you from now on. You will be my rice worm." She meant something. Yi Mulin glanced at her and didn't argue with her. Bai Shuili put Xiao Mumu into the small box and walked in front with her chin up. After thinking for a while, she turned around and said to Boss Ye's subordinates, "From now on, you must call Xiao Mumu young master. He is your young master's son." Secretary Gao raised his hand. "The tortoise is a female." The riceworm was embarrassed and coughed. "Call her miss." However, she felt something was wrong immediately. It was a female. It was a female. Secretary Gao said kindly, "Boss asked me to buy a female one." Bai Shuili stared at the female tortoise in her hand and was furious. "Yi Mulin, you bastard. You don't like it? Just throw it away if you don't like it." Yi Mulin looked at her coldly, took the box from her hand, and threw it into the trash can. Clean and neat. She was stunned. Then tears gathered in her eyes. "Yi Mulin, you hurt the little animal. Yi Mulin, you don't care about life. Yi Mulin, you have no love." Facing her accusation, Lawyer Yi just looked at the struggling tortoise coldly. It is still alive. But whether it can live or not depends on your luck. Here are all cold-blooded lawyers like me who don't care about life and don't care about small animals. So, no one saved it except its own kind. Tortoise and rice worm. He said viciously. Not only Bai Shuili was furious, but also his subordinates were stunned. Although Lawyer Yi was eloquent, he had never argued with a little girl like this. Last night, the lawyer would have said that such behavior was childish and ridiculous. He would have said that it was disgraceful and a waste of life. Was the man who was wasting his life Lawyer Yi? Yi Mulin glanced at his subordinates. Everyone went back to work, only daring to sneak a peek at Bai Shuili. The riceworm was really struggling. In the past, she wouldn't even pick up a Hermes that cost more than 1,000,000 yuan, let alone a little bastard that cost more than 10 yuan. She took a few hesitant steps. If it died, then so be it. Anyway, this kind of small animal was worthless, and there were many of them on Earth. After taking a few steps, she stopped again. However, there was only one little tortoise named Xiao Mumu, and she was the one who came up with the name. "Pick it up." "How bad would it be for her?" by Xueli to pick up things from the garbage. If word of this got out, how would she be able to face anyone? But if he didn't pick it up, what if it died? He snorted and said to those who were watching the show, "All of you, turn your backs." Her voice was arrogant and as usual by Xueli's. His subordinates all turned their backs to him, but they were all secretly laughing. Actually, the boss's wife was very cute. She had the most open appearance, but had the temper of a teenager. No wonder the boss had become childish. Birds of a feather flock together. This saying was not wrong at all. Chapter 33:20. By Xueli looked around and carefully bent down to pick up the little tortoise. It was a female. She stared at it. Why couldn't she see that it was a female? Xiao Mumu. She frowned and carefully put the little tortoise into the box. Then she followed Yi Mulin into his office. Yi Mulin was already sitting behind the desk dealing with business. His coat was thrown on the sofa casually. Inside was a light blue shirt and a dark tie of the same color. It was very pleasing to the eye. Xueli walked to him, and he looked up at her. She snorted and put the little tortoise in front of him. Yi Mulin was going to make a phone call. Now he put down the phone and looked at the little tortoise and its mother. "Have you decided to raise it?" Xueli snorted. "Where should I raise it?" He smiled. "You're its mother. You could decide. You don't have to ask me about such a small matter." "I'm not its mother." Riceworm was angry. "Its name is Xiao Mumu. It's Xiao Bai." As Yi Mulin spoke, he took out his checkbook and scribbled down a bunch of numbers. 20 million. Name it. Is there any problem? She wanted to refuse, but she hesitated when she looked at the check. It was a very tempting set of numbers. She bit her lip and still wanted the check. However, Yi Mulin didn't let her touch it. He looked at her and smiled. "Call me Xiao Bai." Riceworm stared at him. Then she called him unwillingly Xiao Bai. He looked at her and put the check in her palm. He said meaningfully, "Take care of our baby, okay?" He took out a book from the drawer. "This is the Encyclopedia of Turtle Rearing. Take a good look." Xueli reached out to take it and said, "We have a child now. Do we have to increase our living expenses a little?" He looked at her. 500,000. So little. She was not satisfied. Yi Mulin sneered. "If you give birth to one yourself, I'll add 10 million a month. But it has to be my child." She blushed under such straightforwardness. Yi Mulin looked at her and pointed at the little box on the table. "Take this thing away and play in the lounge." She refused. "This is our baby." Smiling, he said, "Your seed." His face darkened again. "Yi Mulin, if you have the ability, ask the security guards to chase me away, or call me Miss Bai." She wasn't afraid of him. She took out Little White to play with, and even made faces at him. She really looked a little childish. He was both angry and amused at the same time. There was nothing he could do about it. In the end, he allowed her to stay in the office with Xiao Bai. Xueli placed Little White in front of him and went to read the encyclopedia of how to raise tortoises. The office was quiet. It was very harmonious. Yi Mulin was busy with his work. After a while, he looked at the little tortoise, then looked at the tortoise's mother, and a smile appeared on his lips. That idiot was so stupid. He was actually reading the Encyclopedia of Tortoises. He thought that when Little White grew up, he would hide it from her and tell her that it had been stewed. She would definitely cry her heart out, and then he would take it out. At that time, her expression would be especially interesting. Just thinking about it made Yi Mulin feel that it was very interesting. At this time, Secretary Li knocked on the door and came in. "Lawyer," she looked at Xueli, who was sprawled on the sofa, and hesitated. "Lawyer AI is here. Do you want to meet her?" Xueli raised her head and looked at Yi Mulin instinctively. There was a flash of hurt in her eyes. Chapter 33:21. Yi Mulin put down the document in his hand and looked at his wife with a smile. "Do you think I should see her?" Secretary Li at the door was shocked. Lawyer Yi was so democratic now. She looked at Mrs. Yi again. Xueli snorted and continued to look at the book in her hand. "I can't control Lawyer Yi." Yi Mulin chuckled and looked at Secretary Li. "Let Lawyer AI in." After saying that, he looked at the rice worm and the corner of his mouth turned down. "How dare you say you don't care?" He smiled, unbuttoned his cufflinks and put them on the table, then rolled up his sleeve a little. The rice worm stared at him, almost suffocating. He was so hateful. He wanted to see her, but he still wanted to seduce her. Did he show his flesh for AI Wei to see? No. She took the book and ran over to sit on his lap. Then, she tore off his tie and threw it on the desk. She even unbuttoned 3 buttons, messed up his hair, and nibbled on his ear, leaving a red mark. He let her do whatever she wanted and looked down at her after she finished. Then, she tried to move away, but she had only moved a little when she was held down by a certain someone. Then, he kissed her inhumanely deeply. The boss of the Yi family seemed to have never kissed her like this before. The kiss was fierce and deep, but his palm held the back of her head so gently. He would rub her scalp from time to comfort her, as if he was coaxing a child. She struggled at the beginning, but then became obedient. She put her arms around his neck and gently called his name, Yi Mulin. He looked up and laughed in a low voice. That's more convincing. He kissed her again and patted her. Go play somewhere else. Her whole body was soft, and there was a layer of mist in her eyes, which looked very attractive. She pursed her lips and said in a low voice, My legs are sore. Yi Mulin smiled, the kind of smile that belonged to an adult man. He stretched out his slender fingers and touched her slightly swollen lips. I didn't really touch you. How can my legs be sore? I just can't walk. She lay in his arms. If you don't hug me, I'll let your old man see what we look like now. Was this a threat from the rice worm? Yi Mulin chuckled. At this moment, AI Wei came in. She was supposed to come tomorrow, but she came early. She admitted that she was a little impatient, but Yi Mulin was worth it. But as soon as she entered, she was stunned. A woman was sitting on Yi Mulin's lap. He looked very intimate, which proved what they had been doing earlier. The woman's back view was very beautiful. Her long hair was spread over her shoulders, and her beige knitted top was pulled up to her shoulders, revealing a very fair skin that was so fair that it was glowing. Likes this kind of woman? AI Wei had never thought that Yi Mulin was a promiscuous man, but it was obvious that he was. In broad daylight, he was able to do this with a woman in the office. He was skilled and mature. This woman is a secretary in the office? Lawyer? Or was it a woman he found outside? AI Wei thought bitterly. Was it because she was too insensitive in the past and didn't take the initiative? Did he like women who took the initiative? Just as she was guessing, Yi Mulin looked up and saw her. He patted the worm on his body and said, Shweli, come down. Chapter 33:22. Yi Mulin lowered his head and stared at her vengeful little face. He chuckled. If you don't come down, I'll call you a little bastard. For the sake of face, Riceworm had no choice but to get down from his lap. She flipped her hair and ran to the sofa. AI Wei didn't want to lower herself, so she didn't look at her. She only knew that she was a woman with a good figure. She just stared at Yi Mulin. He looked terrible. He didn't look like the elite he used to. AI Wei didn't feel good in her heart. At this time, Yi Mulin tidied himself up and said, Shirley, go to the lounge. I have something to say to Lawyer AI. Shirley? By Shirley? AI Wei was stunned. She couldn't help but look to the side. The person who was lying on the sofa and reading was none other than Bai Shirley. Didn't they have a bad relationship? How did they reconcile so quickly? And it wasn't an act. Bai Shirley's lips were swollen from kissing. As a rival in love, AI Wei took a good look at Bai Shirley's appearance. Today, Bai Shirley's makeup was very light, almost no makeup. Her skin was very good and fair. Her eyes weren't very bright, but they were very big. Her eyebrows were also light, and her nose was straight. However, her lips were very beautiful and full. As a woman, AI Wei also thought of the words suitable for kissing. She looked at her with jealousy and then looked at Yi Mulin. Lawyer Yi, did I disturb you? Not really. He had tidied himself up and even put on his tie. He looked like an elite again. However, the visual impact just now was too great. AI Wei still felt that his whole body was full of male hormones. She licked her lips and watched Bai Shirley turn over lazily and continue to lie on the sofa. She didn't have any intention of leaving. Yi Mulin raised his voice a little. Shirley, I think this sofa is very comfortable. It's even more comfortable than your legs. Why don't you and lawyer AI go to the lounge to talk? She said childishly. She didn't care about the occasion. She just wanted to feel good. Yi Mulin's face darkened. He now felt that it was a mistake to bring her to the office. She never cared about anything else except that he was her man. Suddenly, he smiled, and it was a rather indulgent smile. He reached out to adjust his tie, using his eyes to indicate AI way to sit down. He then carried the little turtle over to her, squatted down, and said rather patiently, "You've been reading for so long. Shouldn't you try it out? Go find Secretary Lee. She has some food for Turtle." Feed? Rice Worm frowned. "You want Little White to eat this? What else?" He glanced at a certain part of her body, but the stupid worm did not notice. She scoffed. "Xiaobai is your daughter." Yi Mulin nodded in agreement. "Breastfeeding is advocated now, but by Xueli, do you have it?" What breastfeeding? What was he talking about? Rice Worm's face immediately turned red. She also noticed where he was looking at and immediately covered her chest. "Yi Mulin, you're too shameless." He smiled calmly and said, "If you don't want to feed it yourself, go to Secretary Lee. Call the insider and ask her to send it in." She pouted. "My legs are sore. It's all your fault that you insisted on doing it here." Cleverly, he did not continue. The space of imagination was limitless. Chapter 33-23. Yi Mulin's answer was to carry by Xueli straight out of the room. The group of junior lawyers outside were all stunned. God, the boss's boyfriend power was off the charts. But wait, lawyer AI Wei just went in. The boss's choice was clear. Between a strong woman and a cow, a man still liked a cow. Yi Mulin carried her out. Riceworm thought that he was going to leave her in the secretary's office and was furious. However, Yi Mulin just took Xiao Bai's food and carried her back to the office. He whispered as he walked, "Are you proud now, Mrs. Yi?" Riceworm's heart was already bubbling with joy as he carried her around, but she still said in a reserved manner, "That's it. It's just so." She had to say it was sweet if he gave her a date. She didn't care about her pride. However, she still hugged her husband's neck tightly and let him carry her. Yi Mulin really spoiled her today. This time, he carried her to the lounge and closed the door. "If you come out again, I'll be rough." His eyes told her that it wasn't as simple as hitting her, but she snorted and blushed. He reached out and touched her face gently, saying hoarsely, "You still owe me a beating. Have you forgotten?" He was talking about the time when they bought the bracelet. She promised to help him with that. Actually, they had been married for so long, and he had always been the one who took the initiative. At first, he was rough. Later, he wanted to do something different, but he was worried about her and couldn't bear to force her. Today, she was so hateful, and they moved out. Naturally, he had different thoughts. Actually, AI Wei was right. No matter how absent a man was, he would have no integrity when he met the woman he wanted. Hearing his words, Riceworm's face turned even redder. She ran away with Xiaobai. Yi Mulin's gaze was deep. He looked at her for a while before opening the door and leaving. AI Wei, who was in the office, used all her strength to not lose her composure. She said bitterly, "Does Lawyer Yi spoil his wife like this? She is much younger than us. My mother told me to give in to her," he said lightly. "I was too strict with her in the past." AI Wei almost suffocated. What did he mean by much younger than us? Although AI Wei was 32 years old, she always took good care of herself. She didn't look like she was over 30. That by Xueli, with one look, was obviously a spoiled brat. She was the type that couldn't take hardship and relied on her father and men to live. She said sourly, "I didn't expect you to like such a woman." Yi Mulin frowned. "Xueli? No, Xueli is still a child. Xueli is still a child. Xueli is 26 years old. She wasn't that young either. She was only 8 or 9 years younger than Yi Mulin." AI Wei AI Yi smiled reluctantly. "Yin Yi," she said. "Li Suis. Mulin. Su. Yi. S." He smiled casually. "I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused you, Lawyer AI. Shirley and I will treat you to lunch at noon." "I wonder, would you do us the honor?" AI Wei originally wanted to refuse. She was a proud and capable woman, but she was a little unwilling. She thought that perhaps Emil could let Yumulin see the gap between her and Baishueli. So she agreed. But she had never thought that the gap between her and Baishueli was nothing else but family background. That was the biggest gap between them. The Yi family would never accept a woman with no background. Even if she was extremely capable, it would be useless. Chapter 33-24. AI Wei agreed, and Yumulin started to talk business with her. He wasn't a man who would waste time, nor was he a lawyer who would waste time. He used every second just right. AI Wei was working with him in a pleasing manner. In her heart, this man was perfect. However, he was married, and he didn't belong to her. She could only look at him carefully through business. She would also make things difficult for him, because his eyes would stay on her face for a little longer, even if it was just for a second. AI Wei felt a little bitter in her heart. But at the same time, she was a strong woman. Even if he was married, she still felt that she had a chance because his wife wasn't good enough. She talked with Yumulin for about 2 hours about the billion-dollar company. She almost broke down. She didn't have the energy to look at him and think about other things. At this time, Yumulin stopped talking. AI Wei, let's call it a day. He raised his hand to look at the time. It's already 11. AI Wei smiled. It's lunchtime, right? She thought bitterly that if it was just them, without Baishueli, it would be a wonderful lunch. But Yumulin nodded lightly and walked to the door of the lounge. When he opened the door, a sad voice came from inside. Honey, I'm hungry. Then, the rice worm hugged his waist and buried her face in his mouth. Xiaobai is hungry too. She even raised her eyes and looked at him playfully. She acted coquettishly and naturally. AI Wei sat there, dignified and elegant. She thought to herself, was this why Yumulin liked Baishueli? Superficial acting coquettishly was just like those girls nowadays. They thought they were cute, but they were actually very funny. Sorry, she couldn't do it. On the other side, Yumulin looked at his rice worm. Although he knew that she was acting, he still felt it was a little funny. Let's go eat, and he turned around and introduced her solemnly. My junior in New York, AI Wei. He looked at AI Wei again. My wife, Baishueli. AI Wei stood up and walked over slowly. She stretched out her hand politely and looked at Yumulin. What does Miss by work? Yumulin smiled and looked at the rice worm. Baishueli said confidently, I don't have a job for the time being. I might have to have 2 children before I find a job. AI Wei nodded understandingly. Understood. It's hard being Mulin's wife. He's always busy. Baishueli ignored her and reached out to hug Mulin's arm. Hubby, are we eating with lawyer AI? Aren't you going to hire those subordinates of yours? Isn't that a little too harsh? Yumulin smiled. It's a private dinner today. AI Wei couldn't help but ask, Miss Bai, do you know how much it costs to eat a high-class meal for dozens of people? This is B City, China. Why do we need to use US dollars? Baishueli looked puzzled. And no matter how expensive it is, we can still afford it. AI Wei sneered in her heart, but she still maintained a polite smile on her face. As long as Mulin is happy. Baishueli looked at Yumulin. Are you unhappy? Yumulin held her hand seriously. Let's go. Chapter 33-25. Baishueli didn't find that Yumulin was actually very tall until she didn't wear high heels. He was probably a head taller than her. He was definitely more than 185. She looked at his hand, holding hers, bit her lip, but still reached out to hold his hand tightly. This scene made AI Wei's eyes dim. He should give up. His choice was actually quite obvious. It was the aesthetic of a straight man. But as a woman with self-esteem, AI Wei couldn't accept losing to such a bad woman, so she didn't want to give up. Such a threesome naturally attracted the attention of all the staff in the office. Compared with the first time AI Wei came, Lawyer Ye's attitude changed greatly. This time, he stood firmly by Mrs. Ye's side. In fact, the minions also thought that Mrs. Ye's figure was better. She was hot when she was sexy, but now she was as amiable as the girl next door when she didn't put on makeup. Both of them made men relax. On the contrary, Lawyer AI was also very beautiful, but she was sharp in a suit and sharp in a party in an evening dress. In short, if they were in the same profession, Lawyer Ye's nerves would probably be tense all the time, feeling that he would have to negotiate at any time. If they had to choose, they would also choose a beautiful little vase that was pleasing to the eye, cute, and easy to bully. They couldn't imagine the scene of Lawyer Yi bullying Lawyer AI. When the three of them walked to the door, Bai Shuili suddenly bit her lower lip. Will little White starve to death? Yulin said immediately, don't think about taking him to the restaurant. And the turtle can be fed once every 2 or 3 days. If you feed him too much, he will die. She said, oh, and felt that it was a pity. Actually, she quite liked Little White. The chosen restaurant was a bit far from here. AI Wei drove by himself, and Yulin brought his wife. They arrived at the French restaurant in less than 10 minutes. In the car, Bai Shuili had tied her long hair into a braid and placed it casually in front of her. In addition, the clothes she was wearing were quite fresh. She sat next to Yulin, and when she asked him to order for her. AI Wei took a sip of water and smiled lightly. Miss Bai, why don't you go out for a walk? Bai Shuili took Yulin's aperitif and played with it in her hand. What does Lawyer AI mean by going out for a walk mean? Studying abroad. AI Wei was a straightforward person, so she quickly answered. Bai Shuili let out a long, oh, before nodding her head. I'm not good at my studies, so I've never thought of going abroad. Besides, I like China. It's so much fun in China. Why must I go abroad? Is the moon rounder there? AI Wei couldn't communicate for a while. She had worked in the company in San Francisco for several years and didn't want to come back for the time being, unless the man sitting opposite her hinted to her to come back. When she came back this time, she heard the news of his marriage. AI smiled faintly. I don't know if the moon outside is round or not, but I don't want to sit at the bottom of a well and look at the moon. Bai Shuili let out another long, oh, and said in a rather admiring tone, Lawyer AI is so independent. She tilted her head and looked at Yulin. Her voice was soft. What about you? Are you willing to go out with me? Why don't we postpone having children for a few years? Don't mess around. Yulin looked at the menu and gently knocked her head. I'll be 40 in a few years. Bai Shuili quickly glanced at him and blushed slightly. Chapter 33:26. Bai Shuili picked up the wine glass and took a sip to cover herself. But she choked. This was a high-class restaurant, so it was uncomfortable to hold it in. Yulin quickly noticed it. He had a helpless and indulgent expression on his face. Drink some water to calm it down. Bai Shuili quickly drank some water to feel better. She frowned at him. What kind of aperitif is this? It tastes strange. He saw that she was fine and continued to order. He lowered his head and smiled faintly. You're not allowed to drink it in the future. The riceworm did not say anything. He ordered for himself and Bai Shuili. He gave the menu to AI Wei. You order yourself. AI Wei actually wanted him to order for her, but she could not say anything now. She took the French menu and used fluent French to communicate with the waiter. She ordered whatever she wanted. The restaurant was high class and the waiter was beautiful, but he did not speak French. The waiter was confused and could not speak for a long time. AI Wei kept her head down and didn't notice the waiter's embarrassment. Yulin wanted to help, but his riceworm had already whispered AI Wei's order to the waiter. His voice was soft and gentle, and the waiter immediately memorized it. Then, Milletworm felt her husband holding her hand. She looked at him and struggled, but could not break free. He nonchalantly picked up the aperitif with his other hand and elegantly took 2 sips. AI Wei closed the menu and looked at Bai Shuili. She was slightly surprised. Didn't you never study abroad? Bai Shuili took Yulin's aperitif to play with as she said casually, I hired a tutor. At most, the family hired more than 10 tutors in different languages, so I know about 7 or 8 languages. However, it is limited to eating, drinking, and playing. I don't know anything professional. In reality, 7 or 8 countries was already very powerful, even if it was just eating, drinking, and playing. Yulin knew a bit more. He always knew that the Bai family raised Bai Shuili according to the standards of a princess, but he did not think that they would raise a riceworm that only knew how to eat, drink, and play. He himself did not expect that he would raise this precious riceworm. It was actually quite expensive to raise her, but he seemed to be very happy so far, and he was happier every day. Especially when she spoke to the waiter in a soft and small voice, he especially enjoyed it. Just looking at her small face, he had an urge to take her home, press her on his bed, and harshly bully her. In this world, there was a kind of woman who was born to be pampered by men. They were raised at home, like his mother, like his rice worm, and Little White. The eldest of the Yi clan had never had a child before, but now he actually had the feeling of having a wife and daughter. He himself felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. Hearing his words, Ai Wei only smiled. At that moment, she didn't know where her stockings were hooked. She squatted down to take a look, but the moment she squatted down, she realized that Yi Mulin was holding Bai Shiuli's hand under the table. Bai Shiuli seemed to find him annoying and always wanted to break free, but he always had a way to catch her. Ai Wei blinked and thought bitterly, so he really likes this woman. She did not understand why he liked a woman that only knew how to eat, drink, and play. Where was his ambition and revenge? Was it all going to be wasted on this woman? When Ai Wei raised her eyes again, she pretended not to see anything. She smiled faintly. I'm going to the bathroom. Bai Shiuli watched her leave and said to Yi Mulin, I want to go as well. Chapter 33:27. She looked at him and nodded. Then she walked towards the washroom. As a female, she understood Ai Wei's call. Who was afraid of who? She was Mrs. Yi, and she and Yi Mulin even had the fruit of love. Bai Shiuli walked into the washroom. Ai Wei was touching up her makeup. Bai Shiuli walked over to wash her hands and met Ai Wei's eyes in the mirror. Ai Wei said naturally, You and Mulin are not suitable. Bai Shiuli directly leaned to the side and watched Ai Wei touch up her makeup. To be honest, Ai Wei was very beautiful and also very capable. She looked like the model of America's Hillary from many years ago. She had an aggressive type of beauty. She also did not know why her husband did not like this ice beauty called Ai Wei now. In fact, at the beginning, she thought that Yi Mulin called her Miss Bai for Ai Wei. Later, she felt that it was not the case. His attitude towards Ai Wei was even worse than his attitude towards Secretary Li. Bai Shiuli nodded and said lazily, Actually, I don't think it's suitable either. Ai Wei looked at her. Bai Shiuli looked down and played with her fingernails. He is 10 years older than me. There is a generation gap. I always want to divorce him, but he doesn't want to. She looked up at Ai Wei. Can you help me persuade him? Ai Wei's heart skipped a beat. Then she looked at her. Are you really willing to leave him? Bai Shiuli sneered. It's not like the Yi family has an heir to the throne. Why should I cling on to an old man? He's so old-fashioned and his life is boring. Ai Wei, why would you like such a boring man? She said it smoothly, but Ai Wei's face turned ugly, because Bai Shiuli not only saw through her mind but also exposed it. Ai Wei couldn't bear it, because Bai Shiuli didn't even have the basic manners. She was angry, but she couldn't show it. Bai Shiuli didn't stand on ceremony with her and chuckled. Lawyer Ai, you are a lawyer. You should know that being a mistress won't be punished by the law, but it will be condemned morally. You don't want your career to be affected by your personal affairs, do you? Ai Wei's expression was a bit arrogant. In my heart, my career will always come first. Oh, I'm different from you. Bai Shiuli smiled carelessly. My own happiness is the most important thing. Ai Wei looked down on her. You're too selfish, Mulin. This is selfishness. Also, Yi Mulin likes this kind of life. Can you replace him? Bai Shiuli smiled. Lawyer Ai, isn't it selfish of you to intervene in other people's lives? Ai Wei was a lawyer, and a very famous one at that. But at this time, she couldn't win against Bai Shiuli, not because of anything else, but because Bai Shiuli was that person's wife. She still wanted to say something, but Yi Mulin's voice came from the bathroom door. Your favorite dessert has been served. Ai Wei wanted to say that she didn't order dessert, but she suddenly thought of something and remained silent. She went out first. When she passed by Yi Mulin, he said, Don't bully her. She doesn't know anything. Ai Wei almost burst into tears. Since when was nothing an advantage? She paused, smiled, and left, maintaining her demeanor. Yulin looked at Bai Shueli and said in a low voice, "How long are we going to stay here?" Chapter 33:28. Yulin approached her and brushed her hair. He said absent-mindedly, "I'll go shopping with you later." "No." She leaned against the sink. "I don't want to have her smell on me and remind you of her all the time." Yulin was silent for a while. Then he leaned closer to her and said in a low voice, "Are you confessing to me?" Riceworm's face immediately turned red, and he looked at him eagerly. "No." She drew circles on the sink with her little hand. "I'm angry. I have to eat with you and your first love." It was rare for her to be angry, but it was kind of cute. Yulin's fingers slid down and pinched her face. "My first love is not her." Riceworm bristled when he heard this. "You have other women." Yulin looked at her furious look, and his face turned cold. "My first time was after our marriage." What he meant was that he had given her his virginity. What else was there to be dissatisfied with? Bai Shueli glared at him. After a long time, she bit her lips and said, "I'm not a virgin mentally." His cold face suddenly became gentle. He smiled. "You care so much?" "Actually, Bai Shueli, you're the one who's not a virgin mentally." She jumped up and said, "It's my first time too." After saying that, she blushed. Yulin didn't argue with her. He just looked at her with a very warm gaze. Then he said lazily, "Don't forget what you promised me." "Pervert." Riceworm only dared to say it in a low voice. Then she followed him back to the dining room. AI Wei ate very elegantly, but obviously she didn't think too much. The couple opposite her made her feel upset. In the end, AI Wei ended the meal early, saying that she had something to do. Riceworm enjoyed the food and looked at her in confusion. "Why don't you eat more? You only ate half of the food that we ordered." Yulin often told me that there are many children who don't have enough to eat. It's not good to waste food. As she said that, she also looked at Yulin with a face that asked for praise. Yulin was speechless. He just took a sip of the aperitif. AI Wei couldn't bear it anymore and said, "We need to maintain our figure. Eating too much will make us fat." "No." Riceworm was confused. "I eat a lot, but there's no meat in the places that shouldn't be fat." She thought of something else. Probably because he exercises a lot. Yulin glanced at her. "Just because you WeChat 100 times a day?" She blushed and couldn't help but think of his needs every night. She was covered in hot sweat. AI Wei couldn't take it anymore. She stood up and smiled lightly. "Lawyer Yi, I'll be leaving first." Yulin stood up and smiled faintly. "Don't take Shui Li's words to heart. She has been spoiled since she was young." Riceworm said in a low voice, "What I mind is your words, Lawyer Yi." She deliberately imitated AI Wei to call him Lawyer Yi. How could Yulin not understand? He glared at her. AI Wei forced a smile. Of course not. But her heart was cold. Riceworm watched her leave and sat down. He pushed the dessert away and took 2 sips of water. Yulin looked at her. "You can't get fat just by eating too much, right? How can there be a woman who isn't fat? Only a woman who can't control herself." She said in a soft voice, "Of course I have to control myself. Otherwise, who's going to pay for my credit card if I become fat?" Chapter 33:29. Bai Shueli glared at him. Yulin smiled and got up to pay the bill. When they went out, he took her to the perfume counter and picked out a perfume that he liked. After swiping his card, he said, "Put this on at night." He paused again. "Put this on every night from now on." Bai Shueli glared at him. "Shameless." He smiled and walked in front of her with her perfume in his hand. Later, he went to the women's clothing store to pick out clothes for her. He was the one who picked out the clothes. She only needed to sit on the sofa and watch him pick out the clothes. His eyes were very sharp. He made a decision after a few glances. Then he swiped his card and wrote down the address, asking someone to send it to the apartment. He didn't even ask about the size. Riceworm couldn't help going forward and whispered, "What if it doesn't fit? You don't even know my size." Yulin turned his head and looked at her in surprise. After a long time, he smiled and said, "Do you think I don't know?" His eyes fell on her face and then moved down. It was a little ambiguous and a little dirty. Riceworm blushed, turned around, and ran away. Mulin chuckled softly. His smile was full of satisfaction. He walked over and pulled her to the next store. He only stopped after buying dozens of clothes for her. However, he still dragged her to a lingerie shop. Baishuli thought he could pick out the clothes himself, so she wanted to sit on the sofa and rest. Mulin grabbed her hand and walked over to her. He asked casually, "Don't you want to try?" "Try? Try what?" Baishuli bit her lip. "Mulin, I don't want to try." She didn't even want to try the outer clothes, let alone the inner ones. He looked at her as if he knew what she was thinking. He said slowly, "The outer clothes are for others to see, and the inner clothes are for me to see. Of course, I want to try them." He took 5 or 6 sets of clothes and threw them to her for her to try. He also picked a few pajamas. Although they weren't all lace, they were the kind that could be torn easily. It looked like he was up to no good. Baishuli was unhappy and glared at him. "Go and try them." He smiled. "Or I'll try them with you." Riceworm was frightened by his wife's threat and obediently took the clothes to try. Mulin sat on the sofa and read a magazine. The corners of his mouth curled up into a charming smile. After a long time, she came out. Except for one set that she didn't like, everything else was suitable. Mulin looked up at her. "Are you done?" She nodded and looked at him. "Come and settle the bill." It was probably the first time she was shopping with a man, so she was a little shy. When he walked over, she naturally hugged his arm and pressed her face against his shoulder. When Mulin swiped his card, he couldn't help but stare at her for a few more seconds. She blushed and felt shy. In fact, his family's riceworm was not as bold and unrestrained as she appeared on the surface. She was still very shy in her heart. There was a little girl living there, but that little girl liked Mubai. By the time Mulin settled the bill, his face had already darkened. Baishuli was puzzled by his uncertain look, but she didn't want to care about him. He was just an uncle who was going through menopause, yet he still wanted to forcibly occupy a beautiful girl like her. Chapter 33:30. When she got into the car, he threw the shopping bag on her and drove with a dark face. Baishuli hugged the shopping bag and whispered, "If I didn't know better, I would think that you were on your period." He frowned and stared at her. "What did you say?" She didn't say anything and turned her face to the window. She said awkwardly, "Who can stand your bad temper? It's okay for a while, but I can't stand it for a lifetime." Mulin's face became darker, but after a while, it suddenly became gentler. His fingers were still on the steering wheel, but he stopped the car. When he stopped, Baishuli looked at him in confusion. "Why don't you drive?" He turned his head and looked at her. His voice was gentle like never before. "Baishuli, what did you say just now?" Riceworm was confused. "What did I say?" "I said that you have a bad temper and are not easy to get along with." He was still looking at her, and his voice became softer. Except for this, she thought hard, but she couldn't think of anything. His Adam's apple moved a little, and he reached out to touch her face gently. His voice was low and husky. "You just said for a lifetime." "I didn't." She denied it with a hot face. "I said that I can't stand it for a lifetime. You have such a bad temper." "What if I change it?" His eyes became more gentle, and then he unfastened her seatbelt, hooked her head, and pressed her to his side. Riceworm's face was forced to stick close to him. His voice was hoarse. "Baishuli, if I only treat you well, only bully you, and only have you as a woman, only bully you in bed, will you stay by my side for the rest of your life and never mention divorce to me again?" Riceworm was a little scared. He said that he would never divorce her. He wanted her to stay with him for a lifetime. She licked her lips gently and said with difficulty, "Well, don't you always think that I am shallow? If I always be your wife, will it lower your status?" His gentle face suddenly became dark, and he let go of her. His tone was not very good. "Baishuli, do you hate being by my side?" She stole a glance at him and whispered, "You're being mean again. I'm not your slave. Why are you always so fierce?" She didn't make a sound. She turned her face away and actually started crying. When she cried, Mulin remembered that her surname was Bai. Actually, she was already very tolerant of his bad temper. Moreover, she was very obedient. As long as he coaxed her a little, she would be very obedient. Actually, she was just a little girl. The bad-tempered little girl was easy to coax, as long as he was willing to put down his pride. Are you angry? He tried to pull her little face, but she refused. Who was Emulin? If he wanted to do something, he would definitely do it. Very quickly, he turned her little face and examined her carefully. She was really crying. Her eyes were red. Fortunately, she didn't put on makeup. Otherwise, she would look ugly. He pretended to be disgusted and said, "You always cry. What else can you do besides cry? I also know 8 languages, but I only know how to eat, drink, and be merry," she said angrily. Of course, not as good as your first love. He could not help but laugh at her childish words. He reached out and pinched her face. "AI Way is not my first love. I don't care who is your first love. Anyway, you are a man, a woman, and a man." She was furious. Emulin smiled and rubbed his chin. His voice was soft, hoarse, and seductive. "Are you sure?" Chapter 33-31. Riceworm was short of breath under his gaze. She stared at him for a long time without saying a word. Emulin chuckled, "Idiot." After that, he drove again and stopped downstairs of the lawyer's office in a short time. He unfastened the seatbelt and looked at her. "Don't you want to get out?" Riceworm stubbornly refused to get out. She stayed in the car and looked at him. "Tell me, who was your first love?" She murmured. "Emulin, I always feel that I am at a disadvantage. You see, you are entangled with more than one woman." Emulin looked at her and sneered, "But I didn't almost marry someone else like you. Even if you want to marry, no one dares to marry you, Lawyer Yi." She pretended to be shameless. Speaking of this, Lawyer Yi, who was very narrow-minded, became calculative again. He asked seriously, "By Shueli, if Mubai married you at that time, would you marry him?" Riceworm's eyes changed. She looked at him as if he was an idiot and said very slowly, "Of course I would marry him." After that, Emulin got out of the car with a black face and slammed the door loudly. Bai Shueli was so angry. Was it wrong for her to be honest? Moreover, she liked Mubai at that time. Even now, she still liked Mubai's appearance. Mubai was always gentle, unlike him who had a straight face all day long. Who was scared? She followed him to get out of the car. Emulin stopped and just locked the door. He ignored her and went straight to the elevator. In the elevator, she whispered, "Is it wrong for me to tell the truth?" Lawyer Ye's face became darker and colder. "That's good. Mrs. Yi, you are so honest. I hope your body is as honest as your mouth tonight." His words made her hair stand on end. No matter how stupid she was, she knew that she would not have a good night tonight. So she bit her lips. "I want to go back to my parents' house tonight." He looked at her. How could he not know what she was thinking in her heart? He sneered. "It's not too late to go back tomorrow. I bullied you tonight, and you can complain tomorrow." The more she listened, the more she felt it was not the case. She stared at him. "I don't want to complain." His slender body leaned against the wall of the elevator. He looked very relaxed. He smiled gently. "What if I want you to complain?" Her eyes widened. What he really wanted to say was that he wanted to bully her, right? He stepped back and hugged himself. "I want to go back to the mansion," he said calmly. "I've told my mother that we're moving out. Do you want her to think that you don't have any survival skills?" "I don't care. I just don't want to live outside with you. You're too hateful." With that, she turned her back. But very quickly, he hugged her from behind, his face resting on her shoulder, a little heavy. His voice was even clearer beside her ear. "Am I the hateful one, or are you the hateful one? We've been married for so long, yet you're still thinking about Mubaiha." "I wasn't thinking of him. You brought it up." She softened, not very well. Emulin's face darkened. "We'll talk about it tonight." When the elevator opened, he let go of her so that his subordinates wouldn't laugh at him. Bai Shueli didn't want to come out and wanted to go down with the elevator. His threat came from the front. "If you don't come over, I'll throw your little bastard into the trash can." Chapter 33-32. He turned to look at her and scoffed. "In your heart, I'm nothing compared to Mubai, right?" She didn't say anything. Sometimes, silence was a tacit agreement. Hence, Lawyer Ye's face darkened. He walked quickly into the office while his worm followed him. If she couldn't keep up, she would hug his arm and act shamelessly. She was afraid that he would throw Xiao away. Yulin walked into the office, and everyone looked at the couple. His face darkened. Get the security to come and throw Xiuli out. The worm that he had spent so much effort to raise kept saying that another man was good. Even if that man was his brother, he couldn't stand it. Moreover, Mubai was a mistress. Was he more reliable than any other woman? He was so angry that he wanted to throw her further away. He thought that she would say goodbye to him angrily like the last time and curse him to be a bastard. At that time, he could throw that damn Xiao to her. However, when the worm heard his roar, she didn't get angry. Instead, she just blinked her eyes. Everyone in the law office blinked, waiting for a good show. Lawyer Yi was usually too old-fashioned and didn't have any private life. Who would have thought that after getting married, he would contribute so much information to share with everyone? Every quarrel was like a textbook example. Xiuli blinked and looked a little stupid. However, Lawyer Yi still felt that she was a little cute. She blinked for a long time and asked slowly in front of everyone, Yulin, are you jealous of Mubai? Because I said that I like Mubai. In fact, you like me, right? This time, there was silence. Everyone held their breath and waited for Lawyer Ye's answer. Yulin frowned. He wanted to scold her, but her eyes were bright and a little wet. If he said that he didn't like her, she would definitely argue with him for a long time. Actually, it wasn't worth it. He didn't know how long he would have to coax her. At this time, he didn't think that if he didn't like her, why would he think about coaxing her? Why would he think about whether she would be happy or not? Yulin didn't answer in the end. He just glared at her and scolded. Shallow. It was enough to scare her off, but she was very thick-skinned. She directly jumped to his side and asked him sweetly, You like me, right? You like it even if it's superficial, right? He squinted at her. What about you? At this time, the boss of the Yi family, Lawyer Yi, no longer cared about so many people looking at him. He was a little proud and eager to hear nice words from her little mouth. Xiuli blinked and smiled sweetly. I still think Mubai is a little better. Yulin's face darkened. He called out to Secretary Gao, Call security and take this away, something that could anger him to death. However, Secretary Gao had already run away. She wouldn't care about the matters between her boss and his wife. Lawyer Yi obviously liked it very much, but he refused to admit it. He was very stubborn. Yulin glanced around and felt embarrassed. Then he quickly walked into his office and threw the little tortoise out. Take your little white and scram. He did not like the name Xiao Bai anymore. Of all the names, why did he have to be called Xiao Bai? Mubai's name had the word Bai in it. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.